Hello and welcome to Sustainability Matters. I'm Agatha Afemikhe, your host. On this show, we delve into latest developments and innovative solutions in sustainability. Each episode will bring you expert insights, impactful stories, and practical tips to help you make a difference. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode. Hello everyone, good day and welcome to yet another episode on Sustainability Matters. Thank you all so much for streaming our last episode with Mr. Edward Fagbon. Today we have a very, very interesting guest with us today who understands the space of climate communication is in the person of Seyifunmi Adebote, who is the host of Climate Talk podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, Seyifunmi. How are you doing?
Many thanks, Agatha. It's my pleasure to be with you. I'm doing very well. It's a very nice weather, and I feel great today.
This is so cool because before we had started, Seyifunmi was the one asking me, is the audio good? Is my camera okay? I was very excited because usually, like I told him before we started rolling, I would be the one to be asking about stuff like this. But as someone in the podcast space as well, I'm very excited to have you on board today.
That's right. It's a very privilege, I would say, to speak with a fellow podcaster. It's not every time you get the chance to be on the other side of the podcast. So it's really nice. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. How does it feel to be on the other side of the question this time around?
I mean, I think it's good because even on my podcast, I also sort of pass the mic to my guests sometimes and tell them to ask me questions. So I think it always have to be, both sides. It should be a conversation every time. And even as the host, it doesn't mean you have to do all the asking.
100%. I actually like that idea. Maybe I should put you to the test today. But thank you so much for joining us today. I went on Spotify to follow up on your podcast, and I see that you've been doing this since 2019, which is mad impressive because where was I in 2019? Probably doing my master's. So just run us through how you started the Climate Talk podcast. What got you into the environmental communication space?
Okay, great. 2 questions in one. I can start with the second question about what got me into the space. So as a young person, I was very close to the radio. My parents listened to the radio set a lot, and I also took interest in it naturally. I love to listen to news and music shows and, game shows and all that. Yeah. And having spent so much time with the radio, I naturally became very inclined to also figuring out how could things be done better. So when I listen to a radio host, for example, I'm like, why did this person choose this song and not that song? Why did this person come up at this time and not at that time? So I became very inquisitive to know how can radio broadcasting be better. Much later, I got the chance to be into the radio myself, volunteered and interned with a few radio stations, played some games on, over the phone and got invitations. So by and large, my love for radio grew, and also I became very present also in radio broadcasting, a little bit of stint into the TV broadcasting too. Then I got into the university, studied this course that was around environmental resource management. And after university, the SDGs 2015, SDGs became very, well talked about. And there were things around how do we really get people to understand what this SDGs was. Many people were volunteering, but not many people knew about it. And I was right in the center of all of this happening. So I would say these 3 different experiences was what, came together and sort of shaped my pathway into becoming an environmental and communication person today. That also adds up to the second question you asked about the Climate Talk podcast. I'll say between 2016 and 2019, I was very active on the space, climate change space, nationally, internationally. I got access to some of these, rooms, conferences where climate change was being discussed. And I saw that the way in which it was being discussed, they took for granted the fact that many people did not understand some of these jargons and this very high-level technical stuff. And they just spoke about, this is the UNFCCC, we are at the COP meeting, we're planning, reaching for 1.0 degrees. And they just spoke in all of these very terminologies that we're very used to. But as someone trying to get into the space, you literally be lost. And so that inspired me to say, can we have a platform where we simplify what all of this thing means? Not many people would also have spaces or the opportunity to come into this room. Can we have a platform where we showcase what happens at these high-level platforms to the world? So The three inspirations was that first, I wanted to simplify climate change, communicate it in a very simple way to people. The second was I want to be able to show the world what happens in some of these climate meetings, how some of these climate leaders were thinking, UN, or think of multilateral leaders, how they were thinking about climate change. And that was what I wanted to put out through the podcast. And the third was that I wanted to spotlight very practical examples of things that people were doing, ways people were contributing to make the world a better place. Sharing very, could be very small, but scalable, practical, real life things that people were doing. So those were the three things that inspired setting up the Climate Talk podcast. And like you said, we've been doing it since 2019, and we hope to do it for many more years to come.
That is so cool. Thank you so much for that, Seyifunmi. It kind of aligns with how I got into the sustainability space as well. Fun fact, when I was getting into school, I wanted to study mass communications. But my dad was like, how do you want to eat that? You want to go and be doing radio? So he didn't allow me to study mass communications. Funny enough, I studied glass technology in school. And when I got out, I've always had this passion for media. When I got out, I was like, I dabbled into accounting, I dabbled into oil and gas. At the end of the day, media found my way. I found my way into media as well, and mobility as well. So I kind of relate to that story. Okay, so we have a couple of quick fire questions just to get us into the main conversation. We've done a bit of an introduction, which is so cool. So the first question I have, you have 5 seconds to answer them, by the way. If climate change were a superhero, what would its arch nemesis be?
I don't know so much about superhero. That's the
Come on.
Well, like I said, I grew up listening more to the radio than TV. So for my formative years, I didn't know so much about superheroes. Not until I grew older and caught up with a few of them. So I'm sorry, I have to pass on that question.
Come on. Okay, let's move on to the next one. We have 2 more to go. What is the most underrated solution to climate change, in your opinion?
It's important that everyone should learn what it means and how the actions make a difference. I think it's very underrated. The need for individuals to learn about what it means and what role they play in the entire picture. Yeah.
Perfect. So my final question is, if you could give a TED talk on one climate-related topic, what would it be? Let's say we just wake you up from sleep and we're like, Seyifunmi, please come and speak on this topic. What would it be?
To be the role of policy in shaping climate change, especially in the global south.
Sounds very, very serious. Awesome. Okay. We'll unpack that later, but let's get into some of the questions we have for you due to our time. So my first question for you really would be, what is the biggest challenge when you're approaching sustainability, especially from a media perspective?
I think the biggest challenge will be that there is a lot of people who sort of consume what you put out as a media personnel. If you think of, for example, hosting a podcast, for example, you cannot tell exactly who will listen, what's their level of knowledge, what do they know, what are their biases. It's different from when a teacher is trying to communicate about climate change. He knows, okay, I'm teaching, grade 2 students, and they're probably in the sciences, and these are the examples I can use. So I would think that having to communicate something that I think is really important to a very broad, mix of people is quite challenging. Yeah, that I would say is the biggest challenge.
100%. I actually have a related question to that, but I want it to come later on. But before that, can you walk us through your career path, especially exploring sustainability and environmental communications? Just walk us through how you started. Minus the informal, I got into radio, I started a podcast. I'm sure there's stuff you do for 9 to 5 that feeds you, of course. So can you walk us through that step by step?
I could start from the back, start from where I am right now. So I just... I've spent the last 2 years trying to understand the academic part of environmental communications. So what exactly are the theories, what are the strategies around environmental communications and management? That's what I've pretty much been invested in the last 2 years. But before that, I would say 3 years before that, I spent a lot of time trying to explore diplomatic engagements when it comes to climate change issues. First is the fact that when it comes to how climate change is being engaged, take for example in Nigeria, it cannot be approached individually. So there is this component of oh, we need to speak with, parties from this part of the world, global south, global north, developing countries, middle income countries. We all need to look for the different parts of the puzzle that we fit into and try to shuffle it all together. And I have been trying to, most of my work in the last 4 or 5 years now has been around how do we get these different, components. Think about Latin Americans, think about Asians, think about the Europeans. How do we get them to put forward what they understand as the way forward when it comes to addressing climate change? And I've done this in different capacities. Before that, if we back it up a little bit again to 5 years ago, I would say then I was pretty much active on the ground, leading a lot of on-the-ground advocacy efforts, a bit of activism, also writing a lot of articles and opinions about climate change, about climate policies, about what positive things were happening that needed to be spotlighted, what things were not so good that we needed to also sort of correct or push a nudge for. So that will be my career path in the last 6-7 years, I would say. It's a bit confusing since that I started from the end, but that's what it is.
What would you say is the single most important step you've taken in your career so far that has given you some form of leverage to where you are currently?
Consistency, I would say.
Yeah.
Consistency, yeah. And the truth is, if you think of, we're talking about 2016 when I sort of came into the scene about 8 years ago. And then climate change, climate action was not as topical as it is today. So not many people really were interested in what exactly is this young guy saying. So I would say being able to understand what it meant at that time and being able to stay consistent with it, I would say that has been the very one thing that I would think is very important. There are a few other things, grooming other people along the way, being open to correction, a few other things like that. But above all, I would say that consistency is what I think stands out.
100%. I totally agree with you, because currently the way climate change and sustainability has taken off, there's a tendency for one to just want to come into the space and just make it big time. But you've proven that, because when I went all the way through some of your episodes, I saw you started in 2019, and I was asking myself, what was I doing then? I was busy switching from one career to the other. So it's great to see someone that has stayed the course so far, and I think that's very good advice. Okay, so my next question is about...
You'll stay on this path for quite long.
I have to, because there's fire under my legs. I need to stay in one place at this point. But this is something I'm very passionate about. So I think passion will be able to keep me through. Other stuff that I've done in the past is because, media is not going to feed you. Let's do something else, right? So I'm hoping that my passion can keep me on this for a very long time.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to our next question. As someone who has experienced the sustainability space both in Africa and in Europe, where you currently are, what would you say is the difference in perspective and approach to sustainability and climate change from both your experiences?
Yeah, interesting question. I think I would approach this by using something very practical, something relatable, and that could be if we consider the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And it's pretty much, for those who don't know, it's like a triangle. And at the base of that triangle is where you have the very basic needs, of man, like the psychological needs of man, clothes to wear, food to eat, a house to live. And then as that triangle keeps growing up, at the top is where you then have the self-actualization. And in all honesty, we can picture most part of Africa, most part of the developing countries, think about some parts of Asia, some parts of the Latin America also, where they are still at these very, psychological basic needs of life. How can we get clothes on our back? How can we get a house to live? How can we get food on our table? Those are the questions they are trying to answer. And for them, they really would not be bothered about where do I throw my banana peel when I finish eating it. For them, it's about, I got a banana, I've eaten it, and I feel good. I don't know when the next banana will come or when the next food will be on my table, but that is ticked. In sharp contrast will then be the, Europeans, America, other some parts of Asia also, think around maybe Australia. It's considered, if you look at them as on the map, they could be global south, but we know clearly that they are one of the very advanced parts of the world also. And for these people, many of them, I'm not generalizing, but if you look at it if you zoom out a bit and you look at it on a very clear picture, you see that many of them are at this point of, we can say they are at this point of self-actualization. So they're really not bothered about what will I eat. The government can, take care of them if they are hungry. If they get out of job, there is, social security to keep them in a particular house or get them clothes or get them food to eat. So for them, their primary concern is not about what will I eat tonight. They probably know that for the next 5-6 months, probably till the day they die, they can still get a house to live. It may not be what they want, but they know that these primary psychological needs are basic needs of human are ticked. And this is why, on the average, many of them who even have life better, think of those who don't have it better still being able to predict their next future. And for them, many of them who don't have it better, they can then think a lot on a long term, and they can care about, what happens after I eat this banana? If I throw it out, it's a problem, but I can, keep it somewhere and make some organic farming with this, or I could store it somewhere and send it to where it will become a biofuel and will fuel the bus that we run on, or the cars, So this is the reality of things when it comes to how different regions are, going back to your question. And except you put into context the fact that you cannot tell, I keep saying this a lot, because if you read the books, for example, they say, what are the things to do to make the world better and to address climate change? And you see stuff like, turn off the light in your room when you come out. And you cannot tell this to, a young lady in, Bagada, Lagos, who barely has light for 2 hours in a day. And she's very excited. Up Nepal, there is light. And you tell her, turn off the light when you want to go to bed or when you're stepping out of the room. No, I spoke with people who say, I will rather leave the light on, even if I'm not using it, even if I'm going out, because I don't know when next I'll get that light. And if you tell them to turn off the light to make the world a better place, it just doesn't make sense, But if you tell that to someone in Finland, where they have light consistently, that person really cares. It's like, it's a really good thing to do. Or you say, don't keep the water running, close it when you're not using it because some other people don't have water, then they can relate. But not someone in Makoko that lives on the water and does not have water to drink.
100%.
So understanding these different contexts of what sustainability means for different people is a good place to start. But this does not mean that the people in Makoko or that young girl in Lagos does not understand sustainability. They do, because there are people who understand that when they go to farm, they have their own indigenous ways of being sustainable. They have their own local, handed down methods of living sustainably. And we cannot rule that out because we want to adopt the European or the American context of sustainability. So I would think understanding the different context of what sustainability means to this different group of people, like you said, Africa and then Europe, given the context of the question, would be a very good place to start. And lastly, I would say, or to sum this up, I was speaking with a lecturer, very educated man. He comes from Colombia, is lecturing in Sweden. And he said clearly that it's a luxury to be able to think about sustainability if you are living in places that don't have the basics of life. And that's the truth. It's a luxury to think about sustainability the way we have been putting it out, the way it's been very popularly drafted, if you don't have the basics need of life sorted. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely it does, because as someone who is currently in Africa, Lagos, whose career is centered around sustainability, climate change impact, when we go around, for example, sometime last year, we conducted a survey for financial institutions, just trying to understand their ESG footprint across environments, social impact and corporate governance. And when you call people to get their perspective on certain climate change issues, they're like, climate change? My business is about to fold. What do you mean climate change? Please let us survive first. Which actually leads seamlessly to my next question. How do you communicate a subject matter this serious to an audience like this, that is this adverse to the subject matter, if you get what I mean? We're in a country or a continent that trying to survive. How do you communicate the importance of climate change sustainability to this kind of audience? As a communication specialist, what would your opinion be on that?
Great. I could maybe split my response into 4 different aspects here. I could start by saying recently I was also conducting a survey. Most of the time I spent in speaking with people in the first half of this year, or the first quarter of this year, more like asking them questions about what change means, why do you think about climate change. I sort of, framed out 4 different groups of people when it comes to what they think about climate change. There are people who are completely disengaged, like you said, and they just don't want to engage with the topic. It doesn't mean that they do not recognize that, the weather pattern is changing, the heat temperature is rising, or that there is a lot of floods. They recognize these things and they can, in some ways say, oh, it's climate change, I've heard about it, but they still are disengaged with it. They are still looking to answer the questions of their basic needs of life. There are other people who, the second group are those who approach it from an economical point of view. You probably may have seen the recent conversation that I wouldn't call him my friend, but David Uday, sparked recently around how climate change is this religious cult, and he does not believe in this occultic group, and he doesn't think that the Western people can tell us how to grow our economy. And for people like this, we can see clearly that they hinge their points around economical perspective. Nigeria's economy needs to grow. We need to explore our oil and grow our economy and get a lot more developed. There is the third group that are the antagonizers. These are people who feel like, okay, yeah, climate change is real, but it shouldn't be these guys telling us what to do. We should be able to think for ourselves. And lastly are the denialists who think, I just don't believe, I don't care, I don't even know what you want to say, it's not existing, it's not real. So if you understand that, to approach an economic person, for example, you may need to say, hey, first, we can accept that climate change is real without negating the fact that Nigeria needs to develop. Both of them can go pari passu. They say, yes, Nigeria needs to develop. We need this oil, right? Yes, we'll explore this oil. Is climate change real? Yes, it is. Then can we find improved ways of exploring this oil? The fact that it was done in this dirty way 100 years ago does not mean we have to do it that same way right now. So if you're approaching people within that context, they can relate to you. Think about the first group I mentioned, the disengaged. If you can meet their basic needs, say, hey, you know what? We give you food, we give you a place to stay. Climate change is real, we need you on board. You get them on board. It's as simple as that. So understanding these different audience, knowing their pain points can also help you channel their entry points. That's the first response. The second is around the need to reinforce the education around climate change. Like you asked me during the fire round question, what's the underrated thing that people can do or that people need to do when it comes to climate change? I think it's about educating people. I mean, growing up, I always give credit to my mother because she really taught us about, how to sort your waste. And then we really would throw away our waste because there were times when she would dig a little pit and then we can bury it there. And for the other things, we could give it out. So even before climate change became very topical, I could see this informal sort of education shaping what it means to live, sustainably. So I would think if we can really invest in educating people on a very broader scale about, our lifestyle generally, we don't necessarily need to call it climate change or sustainability, but just, healthy lifestyle, lifestyle that is, regardless of what we call it, but just investing in this education in very specific ways could be very significant. The third is around systems and infrastructure. I mentioned that I started out at some phase during my career, I was very much doing on the ground activism. And one of the groups that I sort of led was called Pick That Trash, pretty much active in 2018, 2019. We still have a few activities around Nigeria. But the idea of Pick That Trash was that a few of us came together and we just went out and told people to pick their trash. And we were also picking up the trash. And before you know it, it grew up to become this very huge movement. But after a while, I figured that it's not enough to tell people to pick the trash. Where do they put it? Sometimes you will clean up a particular junction on Saturday morning. You're going out that same Saturday evening and it's already a mess. Sunday morning it's an eyesore, and you're like, wait, wasn't this where we cleaned up just 24 hours ago?
Yeah.
And that brought about the question of systems and infrastructure. So if we tick that first box of educating people, but we still don't put systems that help them find collection bins that are close to them, or that helps them to understand that they can sort things and get incentives, they can get payback for some of these things. If we ignore this part of the systems and infrastructural development to corroborate our education around climate change or sustainable living, then we wouldn't get so far. Fourth point is around the political will and policies. I wouldn't delve too much into that because it could be complex, but I think there is still always the place of political will and the type of political leadership and what their priorities are in influencing, like a national or a very collective approach to driving climate action or sustainability.
Perfect. I think this is a very good and extensive breakdown of what this approach should be. And I feel like I'm going to go back and have to listen to this so I can ingest it very well, because you've shared very, very practical points. Okay, so my next question, we have 2 more questions before we let you go back to your weekend. My next question is the interjection between passion, advocacy and profit, because communications media, as you know it's not streamlined towards 9 to 5 or working under an agency or a business, let's say that. How else can one balance the need for passion, advocacy and profit? For example, because this subject matter is not that mainstream, you have to put in extra work to get people to listen, to get people to buy in. So it brings a question, because sometimes when you tell people I'm into sustainability communications, they're asking you, so what's your plan long term? Right? So can you balance me that? How do you see, for example, the Climate Talk podcast, how do you see passion for communicating sustainability and climate change balancing with profits?
Great. I could spend quite a while sharing a little bit of thoughts around that, but I'll try to make it brief. And I think it's quite important to know the why. Like you said, when you asked me why, I stated clearly these 3 different reasons why I wanted. And not anywhere on that list was the need to make money. Not anywhere on that list was the need to be popular. And it could be, we could think of it in that way because I probably had those boxes checked in some other ways. So if you come in based on, okay, I am passionate about this thing, and it does not answer the questions of these basic needs of life, and if you are not able to then integrate the profitability angle to it, you may quite quickly become very tired and then look back. So I would like to say it's very good to be clear on the purpose. Okay, I'm passionate about this thing, but why exactly do I want to come in? And what's the main thing that I want to do with it? When I also started out, then I used to be very curious about, very mindful of, okay, how many people, am I reaching? How many people are listening? Not anymore. Now I have a team that sort of, I do the interviews and they go out to post. And once in a while I see the metrics and I'm like, oh, this is really good, but not as it was before. I'm not saying it's not good to follow these tracks and, see how well you're doing and improve on things. But I would say that if the aim for you is to document these things, see that you're reaching the right set of people, then it's completely different from someone who just wants to be an influencer, who wants to just be, on the gram every now and then, who wants to be invited for every meeting.
Right.
It's a completely different, game that these different people are playing. Some people are there because they are really passionate about it, and for them, they may not care about the spotlight. Yeah. Others are in the advocacy space because they think it gives them profit and they can make a lot of money from it, and that's why they are there. Others are there because it gives them fame. So I would say that it's not always the case that you can balance these 3 things you said: advocacy, passion, and profit. It's more about being able to identify where you want to fit in the big picture.
That's very good advice, and I really hope people are listening because there's been this rave that somehow pursuing climate change and sustainability is like the next big thing to making it in the world. I also need to listen to that advice as well, because it's easy to fall into that pit of how many people are viewing my stuff? How many people are listening? I want to make it big time. I want YouTube to start paying. I want Spotify to start paying. I need to start making money from those streams. And another thing I'm hearing from you, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that when starting off, this should not be your main source of income because you will burn out. Aside from the fact that we're saying don't mainstream profits, you need money to live and go about your normal day activities. So I would advise and add to what you've said. When starting off in climate communications or sustainability communications, make sure that this is not your main source of income because you're going to kill yourself.
So let me correct that very quickly. I wouldn't say that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
To be very honest, you can come into the space because you think, hey, this is a money-making machine. I want to go there and make my own part of my own share of it. And God help you, you make your money. Yeah, you fulfill your purpose. That's your why. I'm just saying the why has to be very clear. The purpose has
why.
And it does not have to be the same for everybody. You can come in because you feel like, man, I can make money. I can come in for other reasons. You know, someone else can come in because I just want to be famous. I want to be in the center of all of this conversation. So I'm not saying, I mean, to correct what you just said, let's just know that we don't have to find the connecting dots with all of them.
Right. Okay, fair enough. My last question for you, especially for the young people that are going to be watching this, can you give us like a breakdown on opportunities in the climate communications space? And as someone who has had a very interesting career so far in the field, what opportunities do you envision are coming up for climate communications currently? And what should people look out for, say, for the next 5 years, 10 years?
Great. I don't know. I'm not a prophet. I can't see the future. But right now, where we stand, we see that a lot of politicians are trying to throw climate change into their political, their propagandas, their speech, and all of their working documents. And it means that people who understand the core of climate change can help these politicians. Again, I'm saying this clearly because just like I corrected you a few seconds ago, not everyone comes in because they are passionate about it. Some can come in because they want to make money, and the entry point could be that they want to help a politician, coin his or her own narrative around climate change, and then let the world think, hey, this is the man who cares about our climate. For them, it will be purpose fulfilled, and they make their money, and it's an entry point for them. So that's one way that people can look out for. And it's a good thing also because the more we get more politicians, even if in the beginning they don't do it from their hearts, but they made these promises and people can hold them to account and say, oh, you said this, then it means we are gearing towards some, success stories when it comes to how political leaders approach climate change. So that's one. Second, we also have a lot of companies, multinationals, local companies that have to comply with the climate. Maybe there are compliance regulations that they have to comply with. Maybe there are groups they want to belong to, networks they want to belong to, and they have to show that they are very sustainable in their operations. And this is why you see a lot of roles around, sustainability manager or sustainability departments being created in all of these companies. This is another sort of opportunity that I think is in that line. We also have, the multilateral groups, the UN, for example, think of the AU, and all of these separate groups that are trying to, sort of push the whole narrative around sustainability, climate change, environment. And it's not every time that they can pick the tush guys. There's always that need for the local knowledge, indigenous connection. And that could be a place that one could fit into. And lastly, I would say you could also start something of your own. You could see a need around the big picture of sustainability. I mean, and when we talk about this, we're talking about a lot of things. We're talking about waste, talking about water, talking about energy, talking about agriculture, food loss, talking about building, the way we build, talking about energy, talking about transportation. It's like a whole lot of things that we could find the nexus with climate change in. So you could find a particular gap and start up something, employ people, pitch your ideas to bigger platforms and see how it grows from there. So these are some, like I say, as of now, I can't see into the future and what that will be in the near future, but it's an advice that I think people can sort of take up right now.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Seyifunmi. I'm sure someone is going to be able to pick one or two from that. So what's in the pipeline for you, Seyifunmi Adebote, communication specialist? What should we look out for? Where can we see it as well? We will see. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, let's
but
find
we
out
need to have
together.
an
I
idea.
would say that, yes.
We don't want to
One day
see.
at a
Give us an
time.
idea. We don't want to see. Give us an idea. What should we look out for? Where can we find you? How can we follow up with the stuff you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I would say that it's one day at a time. At least that's the way I like to live my life. And we'll see what happens. I cannot predict. Yeah. And I try to also put a bit of what I do, or maybe projects I'm working on LinkedIn, for example. It's just my name, Seyifunmi Adebote. Pretty active on Twitter. Most times I'm just playing rough and just enjoying the banter there. But sometimes I also write very environmental inclined things. There's also the website that I haven't updated in a while, but maybe I will when I find the time. Seyifunmiadebote.com. So yeah, those are where I can be found. Yeah, don't look for me on Facebook because I'm not active there.
All right, I have comments, but I'm going to reserve them before Mark Zuckerberg comes for me. Thank you so much, for agreeing to do this with us despite your very, very busy schedule. I have a question, but maybe I'm going to ask you that question off camera. I feel like people are going to benefit from it.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
What has been the most interesting conversation you've had? Yes, I know this is like the second series and you've had a lot of chats with different people. I saw a few of them. Which would you think is the most memorable and why?
To be honest, a lot of them are memorable in the sense in which they are. I don't know how to say this. They're all different and they're all unique, right? The guests I've spoken with so far are from different aspects of sustainability, so I've enjoyed them for what they are. But my most recent conversation with the programs and partnership leads at the Nigerian Climate Innovation Center, I found it very interesting, mostly because I have a lot of friends in the impact space who are trying to win grants. I'm looking for this grant, I'm applying here, I'm applying there. And I got to sit with him and pick his brain on how he works, just trying to pick out applications that work or that he thinks are worth the money. And just hearing that he gets thousands of applications for one amount of grants that is available to give out was very interesting to me. And just hearing the kind of flops that people make trying to apply for stuff was very funny as well. And I think I enjoyed the episode. It was a serious topic, but it was also light at it. So I like to laugh, I like to banter, so I enjoyed it.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing.
Ask me a question. I feel like I have to ask my own question now.
Feel free.
Yeah. So what advice, this is a bonus question, guys. So what advice would you say you feel you should have gotten earlier in your career that would have helped you make better decisions? Do you get what I mean?
I get what you mean, and to everyone listening, I'm sorry I disappoint you here also. I'm not so good in giving advices.
Oh, come on.
So I cannot give advice, but if I think about, I think I'm grateful for the access to people that I had early in my career, and I would say that it could be something that, people shouldn't take for granted. When you get access to people, maximize it, show that you're trustworthy, and stay consistent.
So can a shy person make it in communications? I don't like to go for networking activities. Yes. Where do I meet people? Can a shy person make it in communications?
I would say yes. You also need to understand that there comes work that you don't have to be the face of it. I have worked in some of those spaces where you do all the behind the scene. It's a very successful event. Everyone is talking about it, but they don't know who's handling it. Think, for example, the person who handled, maybe not sustainability communication, but the person who handled the Tigress handle recently during the Olympics, whoever it was, did a very fantastic job. Right. I don't know if we have the face of the person out now, but it was really incredible the way the person was keeping that, everything the person did was really amazing, especially on Twitter, X now. So you also think of the fact that communication does not mean your face has to be there every now and then. You talked about NCIC, and I know a very good friend who used to work with the NCIC, and now he works with another organization that does a lot of meaningful work supporting climate-focused organizations across the world, and supporting them with grants, supporting them with advice, and seeing that they can go all out and make a lot of huge successes. But he's not necessarily putting anything of that when he talks or when he puts out his, content online. But he's doing all of this communications work, and it's making a lot of incredible successes. So it's possible to understand that being in the comms space does not mean your face has to be there, you have to be doing all the talking. No, not so.
Yeah, I see that. I actually agree with you. And Awa, who is also a big person in communications currently, started off as incognito. Is that the right word? But people didn't know the face to the writing. So I agree with you. There are so many aspects of communications that you can take advantage of. Perfect. I think I've kept you longer than you should have, but I'm not sorry. Thank you so much, Seyifunmi. Thank you for coming on with us. Thank you for making time for this. I wish you a very happy, jolly, good weekend. You guys can catch this episode on YouTube, on Spotify. We premiere every episode on Wednesdays on each of these platforms. Thank you so much. Stay safe and stay green, everyone. Bye. Please stay on the call, Seyifunmi. I have a surprise for you. Thanks for tuning in to Sustainability Matters. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget, new videos premiere on our YouTube channel every Wednesday. Follow us across our social media pages to stay updated on the great content we have for you. Until next time, stay green and stay inspired.